Hook. The prayer app notification on Ahmed Hassan's phone chimed softly at exactly 7:43 p.m. Rehook. That innocent sound would become the trigger for the most expensive 30 minutes in aviation history, destroying careers and exposing the ugly truth about Islamophobia at 30,000 feet. If you want to witness how one man's quiet faith became a billion-dollar corporate nightmare that changed aviation forever, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell, because what happens next will leave you speechless. But let's go back to where it all began. Ahmed Hassan adjusted his silk tie as Southwest Flight 2847 taxied toward the runway, the Phoenix skyline glowing orange in the distance. C2A offered him a perfect view of the sunset, which mattered more than most passengers realized. As a devout Muslim, Ahmed calculated his prayers around the sun's position, and this evening flight would require Maghrib prayer shortly after takeoff. His phone displayed the precise timing, 7:43 p.m. The prayer app he'd used for 15 years chimed softly, a gentle reminder that had guided his spiritual life through countless business trips, family vacations, and corporate meetings across 6 continents. Flight attendant Jessica Martinez noticed the sound immediately. Her head snapped toward the source with the precision of a security guard spotting a threat. In her 8 years of service, she developed what she called situational awareness, really a collection of prejudices disguised as professional instinct. The bearded man in the expensive charcoal suit had caught her attention the moment he'd boarded. His prayer beads, though discreetly tucked into his jacket pocket, were visible to her trained eye. His brief phone conversation in what sounded like Arabic had made her skin crawl, and now some kind of alert going off at calculated intervals. "Excuse me, sir." Jessica approached with the kind of forced smile that flight attendants perfected for difficult situations. "I couldn't help but notice your phone has been making sounds. We're about to take off." Ahmed looked up from his Quran, which he'd been reading quietly in preparation for prayer. The Holy Book's Arabic script seemed to make Jessica even more uncomfortable, her eyes darting between the text and his face as if trying to decode some hidden message. "It's a prayer time notification," Ahmed explained patiently, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language but spoke it flawlessly. "I pray 5 times daily according to Islamic tradition. The app calculates precise timing based on the sun's position." But Jessica wasn't hearing religious observance. Years of post 9/11 airport security theater had conditioned her to hear coordination, timing, planning. "Prayer times," Jessica repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You're planning to pray on this aircraft?" The question carried implications that made nearby passengers look up from their phones and magazines. Emma Morgan in seat 3C instinctively started recording on her smartphone, something about this interaction triggering her journalist instincts from years of documenting social injustice. "If time permits, yes," Ahmed replied simply. "It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Like Christians might say grace before a meal." He gestured toward his Quran. "This is simply my holy book, no different from a Bible or Torah." But Jessica's imagination was already filling in dangerous blanks that didn't exist. Muslim man, prayer times, calculated timing, foreign language conversations, religious texts with Arabic writing. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," Jessica announced, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "There seems to be some confusion about seat assignments." Ahmed handed over his boarding pass without argument, though his jaw tightened slightly. Southwest Airlines Flight 2847, Seat 2A, paid in full. Everything legitimate, everything proper. Jessica examined the boarding pass with theatrical intensity, as if expecting to find evidence of fraud hidden in the barcode. But the document was flawless, premium paper stock, clear printing, valid confirmation number. This confused her. The narrative she'd constructed in her mind wasn't matching the evidence before her eyes. Suspicious Middle Eastern man should have suspicious documentation. Instead, she was looking at a first-class ticket that cost more than her monthly salary. "This still doesn't explain how you afforded first class," Jessica said finally, her voice carrying a tone that made other passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "These seats cost $800. That's a lot of money for..." She caught herself before finishing the sentence, but the implication hung in the recycled cabin air like toxic smoke. "For people like you. For Muslims. For terrorists. Ahmed's phone chimed again. Another prayer reminder as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. The soft notification sound made Jessica flinch visibly, her hand moving instinctively toward the emergency call button. "What was that?" she demanded, her professional composure cracking. "Prayer time calculation," Ahmed explained with infinite patience. "The app tracks sunrise and sunset to determine when daily prayers should be performed. It's been chiming every few minutes because we're approaching Maghrib, evening prayer time." But Jessica was no longer listening to explanations. She was hearing threat assessment, coordination signals, timing devices. Her training kicked in. Not diversity training, but fear training. The kind absorbed from too many news reports about airport security, religious extremism, and the constant message that vigilance meant suspicion. Emma's live stream viewer count climbed past 2,000 as she whispered commentary into her phone. "I'm witnessing what appears to be religious discrimination on Southwest Flight 2847. A Muslim passenger is being harassed for having prayer notifications on his phone." Comments began flooding her feed, most expressing outrage, but some darker voices supporting Jessica's suspicions with their own prejudices. "Sir," Jessica's voice now shook with what she convinced herself was justified concern, "I need you to turn off that app immediately. Other passengers are feeling uncomfortable with the constant notifications." Ahmed looked around the cabin. Most passengers were indeed watching, but their expressions showed curiosity about the confrontation, not fear of him personally. "Ma'am," Ahmed said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd had this conversation too many times before, "this is simply a religious observance app. It's no different from a church bell reminding Christians of service times." He held up his phone, showing the simple interface with prayer times and a Mecca direction indicator. "It's not connected to anything except astronomical calculations." Jessica stared at the screen, seeing Arabic text and compass directions and timing calculations. To her eyes, it looked exactly like what a terrorist might use for coordination. "I don't care what you call it," she snapped, her voice now carrying through the entire cabin. "Turn it off now, or I'll have you removed from this aircraft." Ahmed's hands folded over his Quran protectively. 15 years of business travel had taught him that resistance would only escalate the situation. But today felt different. Today, his patience would become something more powerful than accommodation. "Captain Morrison to the front cabin immediately," Jessica announced over the intercom, her voice cracking with authority and fear. "We have a passenger situation requiring immediate intervention." Ahmed Hassan closed his Quran gently and placed it in his lap. His prayer beads caught the cabin light as he adjusted them in his pocket. 23 years of dealing with discrimination had taught him patience. But today, that patience would transform into the most expensive 30 minutes in aviation history. Emma's live stream hit 5,000 viewers and climbing as Captain Morrison's footsteps echoed through the cabin. Captain Derek Morrison emerged from the cockpit with the confidence of a man who'd navigated 23 years of airline crises. His gold stripes caught the overhead lights as he strode toward the commotion, expecting to find the usual problem passenger scenario. Drunk businessman, unruly teenager, maybe someone trying to upgrade without authorization. What he didn't expect was the quiet, well-dressed man sitting calmly in seat 2A, hands folded over what appeared to be a religious book. "Jessica, what's the situation?" Morrison's voice carried the absolute authority that came from commanding aircraft through thunderstorms and emergency landings. His crew had never let him down before, and Jessica Martinez had one of the best passenger handling records in the fleet. If she said there was a problem, there was a problem. "This passenger has been acting suspiciously for 20 minutes. Jessica pointed at Ahmed with barely controlled agitation. "He won't provide proper identification. He's been making phone calls in a foreign language, and his phone keeps making coordinated sounds. Captain, I think he's planning something." Morrison studied Ahmed Hassan carefully. Expensive tailored suit, calm posture, no visible signs of intoxication or aggression. His briefcase was leather, European-made, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Nothing screamed threat, but Jessica's voice was shaking, and she'd never been wrong about dangerous passengers before. Ever. "Sir, I'm Captain Morrison," he said, his tone professional but firm. "I understand there's been some confusion about your documentation." Ahmed looked up, meeting Morrison's eyes directly. No flinching, no nervous movements, just steady eye contact that spoke of confidence rather than guilt. No confusion, Captain, Ahmed replied, his voice carrying the slight accent of educated non-native English speakers. I'm in my assigned seat with a legitimate boarding pass. He handed over the document without being asked. Morrison examined it closely. Southwest Airlines Flight 2847, Seat 2A, first class, paid in full. Everything appeared legitimate. The issue isn't the boarding pass, Jessica interjected, her voice rising loud enough for passengers in economy to hear. It's him. Captain, look at him. Really look. The beard, the Arabic book, the timing devices on his phone. Does this seem normal to you? Emma's live stream exploded past 8,000 viewers as comments flooded in. This is 2025, and we're still doing this. Get this racist crew fired. I'm recording everything. The hashtag Southwest discrimination began trending as Emma's feed was shared across social media platforms. Morrison felt the weight of 147 passengers watching his every decision. The businessman in 1C tapped his expensive watch impatiently. The young mother in 2C held her children closer, their eyes wide with confusion about why the nice man was in trouble. A teenager in row 4 live streamed to her TikTok followers, her whispered commentary adding to the growing online audience. Ma'am, Morrison said carefully, aware that every word was being recorded by multiple devices. What specific threats did this passenger make? Jessica's confidence wavered slightly. The truth was, Ahmed hadn't made any threats at all. He'd been polite, quiet, almost passive, but his very presence felt threatening to her. He said there would be consequences if we removed him, Jessica replied, though her voice lacked conviction. And, Captain, his phone keeps making these sounds. Like signals. Every few minutes, perfectly timed. As if summoned by her words. Ahmed's phone chimed softly again. The prayer app notification from Maghrib made Jessica flinch visibly. It's a prayer time calculator, Ahmed explained to Morrison with infinite patience. Islamic faith requires 5 daily prayers at specific times based on the sun's position. The app simply provides reminders. He showed his phone screen to the captain, a simple interface showing prayer times, Mecca direction, and astronomical calculations. But Morrison wasn't seeing religious observance. Years of post-9/11 security briefings had trained him to see coordination, timing, potential threats. Muslim passenger. Prayer times. Calculated intervals. Foreign language. Arabic text on both his phone and his book. The pattern felt familiar from security training sessions about aviation threats. Sir, Morrison said, I'm going to need additional identification. Driver's license, credit card, something to verify this ticket purchase. Ahmed reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness, aware that sudden movements might escalate an already volatile situation. Morrison tensed instinctively. You never knew with problem passengers. Ahmed withdrew his wallet, the same expensive leather European-made wallet Jessica had already examined. Inside was a black American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card that required a $10,000 annual fee and invitation-only membership. Morrison had only seen these cards in magazines. His confidence wavered slightly. This is a very exclusive card, Morrison said, studying the heavy metal card with its distinctive design. Yes, Ahmed replied simply. It is. Jessica leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. That doesn't explain how someone like him got first class. Captain, I've been flying for 8 years. I know who belongs where. Emma's viewer count hit 15,000. Major news outlets were beginning to monitor her stream. Local Phoenix news stations were sending crews to Sky Harbor Airport. The Southwest corporate communications team was getting their first alerts about a developing passenger incident with potential discrimination implications. Someone like me? Ahmed asked quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge for the first time. Morrison heard the shift in tone and felt his pulse quicken. This was how situations escalated, how passenger removals turned into federal cases. You know what I mean, Jessica snapped, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. People like you don't usually fly first class. The beard, the foreign prayers, the suspicious timing. Captain, we have a responsibility to our passenger safety. The cabin fell silent except for the gentle hum of engines and the soft sounds of phones recording. Ahmed Hassan sat perfectly still, his hands folded over his Quran. But something had changed in his expression. The infinite patience was transforming into something else entirely. "Captain Morrison," Ahmed said softly, "before you make your next decision, I have one question." His voice carried a quality that made Morrison's blood run cold. "Are you familiar with the legal ramifications of religious discrimination in interstate commerce?" Morrison felt his career prospects shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. The word discrimination hung in the pressurized cabin air like a toxic cloud. Morrison felt his mouth go dry as he processed Ahmed's question about legal ramifications. 23 years of flying, and he'd never had a passenger speak with such precise legal terminology. This wasn't the language of someone trying to cause trouble. This was the language of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had the knowledge to fight back. "Sir, we're simply following standard security protocols," Morrison replied, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Emma's live stream had reached 25,000 viewers, and the comments were a blur of outrage and legal advice. Lawyers in the chat were already discussing federal civil rights violations and interstate commerce law. "Standard protocols," Ahmed repeated softly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. "Captain Morrison, in your 23-year career, how many white passengers have you personally removed from first class for quietly reading religious texts?" The question hit like a precision strike. Morrison's face went pale as he realized the mathematical impossibility of his situation. Jessica stepped forward, her voice shrill with desperate authority. "This isn't about religion. This is about suspicious behavior, coordinated timing, and passenger safety." But her words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Ahmed had done nothing but sit quietly, read his Quran, and receive prayer notifications. The same notifications Christian passengers receive for church services, Jewish passengers for Shabbat times, and Buddhist passengers for meditation reminders. "Officer Kim and Rodriguez, please board the aircraft immediately," Morrison announced over his radio. "We have a passenger requiring removal." Ahmed's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The infinite patience was transforming into something more dangerous, quiet determination. "Captain," Ahmed said, reaching slowly for his briefcase, "before those officers arrive, perhaps you should know something about the passenger you're about to arrest." Morrison tensed as Ahmed opened the expensive leather case. Inside were legal documents, business cards, and what appeared to be corporate identification. 2 airport security officers boarded the aircraft, Jana Kim and Mike Rodriguez, both carrying restraints and the weary expressions of people who'd dealt with too many problem passengers. Kim surveyed the scene. Well-dressed businessman sitting quietly, flight crew visibly agitated, phones recording from every angle. "What's the situation?" Kim asked, her voice professional but cautious. Something about this scene felt different from the usual drunk passenger or ticket disputes. "This individual has been disruptive for 30 minutes, Jessica said, pointing at Ahmed with a trembling finger. "He's been making coordinated signals, speaking in foreign languages, and refusing to comply with crew instructions." Ahmed remained perfectly still, his hands folded over his Quran, but his eyes tracked every person, every camera, every witness. He was calculating something, waiting for the right moment. "Sir," Rodriguez stepped closer, hand moving toward his zip ties. "We need you to come with us voluntarily." "I'm in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass," Ahmed replied calmly. "I haven't violated any federal aviation regulations." The specificity of his language made Kim pause. Most passengers didn't know FAA regulations by number and section. "Sir, you're interfering with aircraft operations," Rodriguez continued. "That's a federal offense. Last warning." Ahmed looked at his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's annual salary. The gesture seemed like defiance to the crew, but Ahmed was actually calculating prayer time and the precise moment for his revelation. Emma's live stream exploded past 40,000 viewers. Major news outlets were now monitoring her feed directly. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC were sending crews to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. The hashtag Southwest Discrimination was trending globally, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of airline discrimination. "Officers," Ahmed said quietly, "before you arrest me for the crime of being Muslim in first class, I have one question." Kim's hand moved to her radio. This passenger was too calm, too controlled. "Are you familiar with the legal ramifications of arresting a member of an airline's board of directors?" The words hit like lightning. Board of directors. Kim and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Morrison felt his knees go weak. Jessica's face turned chalk white. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Board members don't fly commercial." Ahmed reached into his briefcase and withdrew a leather document folder, embossed with the Southwest Airlines logo. Inside was a business card that made Kim's hands shake as she read it. Ahmed Hassan, chairman of the board, Southwest Airlines. The cabin fell dead silent. Emma's viewer count hit 60,000 as she whispered into her phone, "Oh my God. Oh my God. The Muslim passenger they're trying to arrest is the chairman of Southwest Airlines." Morrison staggered backward, his radio crackling with urgent messages from ground control. "Captain Morrison, this is Southwest Operations. We're monitoring social media. Your flight has 60,000 live viewers. Handle this situation immediately." Rodriguez dropped his restraints, the plastic clattering on the cabin floor. Kim stared at the business card as if it contained nuclear codes. Jessica began hyperventilating, the full weight of her discrimination now recorded and witnessed by tens of thousands of people. "Chairman," Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, the crew had no way of knowing." "That's precisely the point, Captain," Ahmed said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "You assumed. Your crew assumed. And now 60,000 people have watched those assumptions destroy your careers in real time." Ahmed's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Southwest Airlines CEO. He answered on speakerphone. "Ahmed, this is Robert Jordan. We're watching the live stream. Are you all right?" The CEO's voice filled the cabin, confirming what everyone now realized. They had just discriminated against the most powerful person in the company. Emma's comment section exploded with shock and vindication. "Justice. They're so fired. This is the best thing I've ever seen." "I'm fine, Robert," Ahmed replied calmly, "though I think Captain Morrison and his crew have some explaining to do." Morrison felt 23 years of flying evaporate before his eyes. Jessica collapsed into a passenger seat, sobbing uncontrollably. "Chairman Hassan," Rodriguez stammered, "we were just following crew reports." "You were following prejudice disguised as procedure," Ahmed interrupted. "And now the whole world has seen exactly how discrimination works in 2025. Ahmed stood slowly, commanding the attention of every person in the cabin. His voice carried to the back rows where economy passengers craned their necks to witness history being made. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ahmed announced, "what you've witnessed today is how assumptions become lawsuits, how bias becomes headlines, and how prejudice becomes corporate crisis. In the next hour, this incident will cost Southwest Airlines approximately $800 million in stock value." Morrison's radio crackled with panic from ground control. "Captain Morrison, we have 17 news vans at Phoenix Sky Harbor. The FAA is requesting immediate incident reports. CNN is calling for live interviews." Ahmed looked directly at Jessica, who was still sobbing in passenger seat 2C. "Ms. Martinez, your assumptions about Muslims just bought Southwest Airlines the most expensive civil rights training program in aviation history." The plane was still taxiing toward takeoff, but everyone knew this flight would never reach Phoenix the same way it had left the gate. Everything had changed in 30 minutes. Ahmed sat back down, opened his laptop, and began typing. "I'm documenting every word that was said here today. Every assumption, every moment of bias, every violation of civil rights. This will become required training material for every airline employee in America." The test was almost over. The real reckoning was about to begin. Southwest Airlines stock price plummeted in real time as Ahmed Hassan's revelation sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Emma's live stream had reached 80,000 viewers, with major news networks broadcasting her feed directly. The hashtag Southwest discrimination was trending globally, and legal experts were already discussing the potential billion-dollar lawsuit implications. "Robert," Ahmed addressed the CEO through his phone speaker, I want Captain Morrison and Ms. Martinez to have one opportunity to salvage their careers. The cabin held its breath. Morrison and Jessica looked up with desperate hope in their eyes. What kind of opportunity? CEO Jordan's voice crackled through the speaker. Public accountability. Full media confession. Commitment to become advocates for anti-discrimination training in the airline industry. Ahmed replied coldly. Morrison's voice was barely audible. Sir, what happens if we refuse? Ahmed consulted his tablet, showing Southwest crisis management protocols. Termination with cause. No severance. No benefits. Personal liability for civil rights violations. Based on similar cases, approximately $2 million each in damages. Jessica's sobbing intensified as the weight of complete financial ruin crashed down on her. We'll do whatever you ask, sir, she whispered. Rodriguez and Kim backed toward the aircraft door, realizing they were witnessing career-ending discrimination in real time. Here's what's going to happen, Ahmed announced to the cabin, full of recording devices. This aircraft will complete its flight to Phoenix. Upon arrival, these crew members will face a choice: public accountability or professional destruction. Morrison's radio erupted with emergency communications. Captain Morrison, this is FAA headquarters. We have a federal civil rights investigation team en route to Phoenix. Maintain your current status until further notice. Ahmed opened his laptop and began drafting a press release. Southwest Airlines announces comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative following chairman's personal experience with religious bias, he read aloud. This program will include mandatory bias training, body cameras for crew members, and a $50 million fund for discrimination prevention. Emma's viewer count hit 100,000 as the plane finally began its takeoff roll. Ladies and gentlemen, Ahmed's voice carried over the engine noise. You're witnessing the flight that changes everything. When we land in Phoenix, Southwest Airlines will never be the same. Jessica looked up through her tears. Chairman Hassan, why didn't you just tell us who you were from the beginning? Ahmed's expression softened slightly. Because I shouldn't have to prove my worth to sit in a seat I paid for. The moment I have to justify my presence based on my religion, discrimination has already won. The plane climbed into the evening sky, carrying with it the most expensive 30 minutes in aviation history. Below, news vans raced toward Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, ready to document the landing that would reshape airline policy forever. Ahmed closed his laptop and looked out the window at the setting sun. His prayer time app chimed softly, the same innocent sound that had started this entire confrontation. This time, no one flinched. The revolution would be live-streamed at 30,000 feet. Flight 2847 touched down at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport to a scene that looked like a presidential arrival. 17 news vans lined the tarmac, helicopters circled overhead, and federal investigators waited with legal documents. Emma's live stream had reached 150,000 viewers as she documented the most expensive landing in aviation history. Ahmed Hassan gathered his belongings slowly, his prayer beads catching the cabin lights one final time. Ms. Martinez, Captain Morrison, he called out. Your choices await you outside. Through the windows, they could see CNN's Anderson Cooper setting up for a live broadcast, 60 Minutes crews adjusting cameras, and legal protesters holding signs reading "Justice for Ahmed" and "End Airline Discrimination." Jessica wiped her tears and stood on shaking legs. Chairman Hassan, I want you to know, I have a 7-year-old daughter. What do I tell her about today? Ahmed's expression softened for the first time. Tell her that people can change. That mistakes don't have to define us forever. That her mother chose courage over comfort when it mattered most. Morrison shut down the aircraft systems with hands that trembled like autumn leaves. Sir, my son is mixed race. If someone treated him the way I treated you. His voice broke. Then you have a very personal reason to make this right. Ahmed replied quietly. As passengers deplaned, they were met by a media circus that stretched across 3 terminals. Emma Morgan found herself thrust into the spotlight as the citizen journalist who documented discrimination in real time. Her phone buzzed with interview requests from every major network. Ahmed paused at the aircraft door, addressing the cabin one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, you've witnessed how quickly assumptions become headlines, how bias becomes billion-dollar lawsuits, and how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. In 6 months, Southwest Airlines will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. Jessica took a deep breath and walked toward the CNN cameras. Her career was over, but maybe her real work was just beginning. Morrison followed, thinking about his mixed-race son and the world he wanted to leave him. As Ahmed stepped into the Phoenix heat, reporters shouted questions about lawsuits, stock prices, and corporate responsibility. But he raised his hand for silence. "This wasn't about me," he said simply. "This was about the 2,300 Muslim passengers who've been discriminated against by airlines in the past 5 years. Today, their voices were finally heard." Emma's final live stream comment hit like lightning. Sometimes justice arrives at 30,000 feet. Sometimes change happens when ordinary people refuse to stay silent. Today, 60,000 witnesses prove that discrimination dies in the light. 6 months later, the Morrison-Martinez Protocol will be mandatory training at every major airline in America. Jessica and Morrison would travel to over 200 airports, sharing their story and teaching crews about unconscious bias. Emma Morgan would become Southwest Director of Passenger Dignity Documentation. Ahmed Hassan returned to his office at 2 a.m., scrolling through messages that still arrived daily from passengers who'd found courage to speak up against discrimination on flights around the world. His desk held a framed photo from that evening, not of the media circus or the corporate meetings, but a simple moment, his prayer beads on seat 2, where they'd started a revolution that changed aviation forever. The prayer app on his phone chimed softly, marking the end of the most expensive 30 minutes in airline history. In the quiet of his office, Ahmed Hassan smiled and began to pray, not for justice, because that had already arrived, but for a world where no passenger would ever again have to prove they belonged to the seat they'd paid for. The transformation was complete. The real work would never end. What injustice will you document today? Share your stories below. Subscribe if you believe dignity isn't negotiable. The next Ahmed Hassan is waiting for their Emma Morgan. Will that be you?